I said earlier in the show, we needed defenders of this civilization to stop carrying and start fighting, with words only. A brilliant example this week when Don Lemon, a hard-left race baiter on CNN, asked the question of a British royal reporter on Britain paying reparations for slavery and got an answer that just shut him up. Boom.
And then you have those who are asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, you know, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, $500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you are, you know, you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when across the entire world, when the slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Although one small error that I don't think affects it much. Britain was not quite the first country to ban slavery back in 1833. And in contrast, of course, slavery still exists today in communist China. For instance, the forced labour of Uyghur prisoners and in parts of Africa. Joining me is Daisy Cousens, a Sky News contributor with her own video channel. Daisy Cousens, that clip went viral on social media. Why do you think?
Well, Andrew, it went viral because it was hilarious. It was absolutely hysterical. As you mentioned, Don Lemon is just the most unbearable anti-conservative race commentator screaming about reparations. He's infuriating. So it was so satisfying to see him completely put in his place by a much, much smarter, more informed individual. So my God, my favourite bit was sort of at the end when he retreated and said, well, it's a very interesting discussion, completely owned, absolutely brilliant, top marks. I loved it. It's just what struck me so much, Andrew, in the wake of the Queen's passing was so many woke leftists I've seen have been saying things like Don Lemon, that King Charles should give reparations to so-called British colonies, etc., etc. And it's a bizarre thing to say because the monarch, as we know in a constitutional monarchy, doesn't actually have any legislative power. They can't actually do anything like that, and they haven't been able to do anything like that since about 1689, you know, several hundred years. So I've been listening to these commentators like Don Lemon. One of the hosts of The View said similar, talking about King Charles and reparations. It was all over social media, as we know. And I thought to myself, hang on, I reckon these woke Americans are so ignorant of any political system other than their own. They would have no idea how a constitutional monarchy works. I reckon they genuinely believe that the monarch has some sort of legislative power and can actually dole out reparations as they see fit. And if that's the case, Andrew, which I really strongly suspect it is after observing the last fortnight of news from woke Americans, I really think they should be hanging their heads in shame, and perhaps before they open their mouth on something like this, they should maybe open a book.
This is so true. I mean, there's a wider ignorance too of history these days. We're now paying for that. I mean, no one seems to mention the slavery of the Ottoman Empire, now modern Turkey, the Ottoman Empire taking white slaves from the Balkans, for instance, or all the whites that got traded into the Barbary Coast slave empire, including the author of Don Quixote, by the way. Little side note there. It's weird that we have this absolute witch hunt for any sign of white racism, total blindness from the same kind of woke people to racism against whites. Give you an example, US tech company Twilio says it's sacking 11% of its workers, but its bosses told employees he'll do it in a way that's non-racist. We're committed to being anti-racist, anti-oppression, and this kind of layoffs, they can have a pronounced impact on marginalised community. So we're particularly focused on ensuring our layoffs are carried out through an anti-racist, anti-oppression lens. What would that mean, Daisy?
Look, I'm not entirely sure, Andrew. I can kind of, I can make an educated guess at what they are. It seems to imply to me that the poor people who are going to get fired are going to get fired because of something to do with their race, the colour of their skin, which last I checked, I'm pretty sure is illegal. I'm fairly sure that firings, you're not allowed to hire and fire certainly not allowed to fire based on people's skin colour. So surely somewhere that should breach America's anti-discrimination laws, but the thing is, Andrew, if you stick the word anti-racist before any of these policies, suddenly it becomes not about racism or discrimination based on skin colour. It becomes activism and, providing equity to so-called marginalised communities and et cetera, et cetera. And certainly throughout left-wing big tech, that would be absolutely celebrated. And the reason they get away with it, Andrew, is because the left loves to redefine words, as we know. And unlike normal, sensible people who know that the definition of racism is considering some races to be better than others, or thinking some races should be treated better than others, they think racism is prejudice plus power, which is a totally different thing.
True. Got to go, Daisy. Corey Bernardi, otherwise will really have a go at me. Thank you so much for your time.